Morning, everyone, and welcome to our Enhancing Engagement webinar, The Power of Performance, Community Legal Education through Theatre. I'm delighted to be here with you all this morning and with our new colleague, Vicky Doig, who will be covering my maternity leave. I will be commencing maternity leave at the end of this week, and I'm looking forward to be back at the VLF at the end of next year. Vicky is going to be facilitating this morning's webinar, so it's my pleasure to hand over to her now. Over to you, Vicky.
Thank you so much, Kate. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, as Kate mentioned, from a very muggy VLF HQ. We're delighted that so many people are able to join us. You'll notice as well that we can't see any of you. Your cameras and mics will remain off during this session, but hopefully you can see us. The chat function is also disabled, but there is a Q&A box, so please do pop any questions that you've got into that we might like to pose to our fabulous presenters at the end of the session. We are recording this webinar and it'll be transcribed and captioned before we send the link out of the recording at the end. Now, before I hand over to our fabulous ladies that are presenting today, Kirsten and Angie, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country, wherever you may be joining us from. In our case here at the VLF office, we are in the Bunurong land, and I pay respect to the elders and to all generations of Bunurong and other First Nation peoples, and acknowledge that the lands were never ceded. We recognise the impact of colonisation, its legacy of injustice, and the marginalisation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and believe that acknowledging the past is an essential step to building a better, more equitable future. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce our presenters for today, Kirsten Young and Angie Abdulazam from Peninsula Community Legal Centre. Angie is a lawyer and accidental playwright/actor in this project, responsible for designing and delivering innovative projects to provide legal information to culturally and linguistically diverse communities. She provides legal assistance and advice to clients on civil, criminal, and migration matters. She is also currently running a project to provide legal information to support CALD young people on family violence and forced marriage. And most importantly, she believes that if a movie was to be made about her life, Omar Sharif would play her, the intergenerational heartthrob, Omar Sharif. Kirsten Young is the Community Engagement, Education and Legal Policy Officer at PCLC. She oversees the development and delivery of community legal education, community development projects, and policy and law reform initiatives. She returned to the community legal sector after working for 2 decades with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in various countries around the world. And Kirsten reckons that if there was a film made about her life, she would be played by Danny DeVito. So I'll leave that to your imagination. Kirsten and Angie, over to you.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Vicky, and also for the invitation to speak today. So I'm going to start by giving some of the background to the project, and then Angie will talk about the project in greater detail. And throughout, we're also going to talk about some of the successes and the challenges that we faced in the project's implementation and development. So Angie and I work at the Peninsula Community Legal Centre, which is a generalist CLC that operates in the southeast of Melbourne and the Mornington Peninsula. And we've been running the project in the city of Casey, which is in Melbourne's outer southeast. And it's an area that has high rates of family violence and large culturally and linguistically diverse communities. Family violence and family law are the biggest problems that PCLC deals with, and roughly half of our clients experience family violence, and a third of those come from CALD backgrounds. So we have larger family violence and family law practices, and we also have a migration law clinic which provides advice to people who are on temporary visas who are experiencing family violence. So in an effort to help CALD communities overcome the very significant barriers that they face to accessing justice, we've done a lot of community legal education on family violence to CALD communities, and in particular to CALD women. And in that process, we've received a lot of anecdotal feedback that young teenage girls, while they're still at secondary school, are already experiencing controlling relationships and family violence, often at the hands of their teenage secondary school age brothers, and that some were moving on to forced marriage after they left school. We also received feedback from Uniting's COMAC program, which is an education and support program for Afghan communities, that they were seeing a lot of negative and concerning behaviours by teenage boys. So we decided to partner with Uniting COMAC to set up a preventative legal education initiative using theatre to help young people from CALD backgrounds to learn about family violence and forced marriage issues. And so the theatre sessions were designed to empower young people with information about their rights and their obligations, as well as the support services that were available to them. And we also wanted to shift some of the deeply ingrained attitudes towards gender inequality that often underlie family violence by inviting the audience to connect with the characters in the performance. We also hope to create an engaging and an interactive environment where the teenagers would feel comfortable learning about these fairly distressing topics, and also where they could learn about the information and retain it in a creative way. So we're going to show some images of the performances and the rehearsals while we're talking, so that you can get a real feel for how the project ran. So Jackie, if you can run those images now, I'll hand over to Angie.
Thank you, Kristen. So to begin with, we approached the problem of engaging young people with a design outlook to create innovative and engaging community legal education sessions. The design process included different stages and was initiated through consultation meetings to develop the most appropriate method to deliver this sensitive material to secondary school age audiences. Consultations were held with community legal, the community legal sector, specialist organizations working with forced marriage victim survivors, and community organizations delivering educational programs for CALD youth. There was consensus in these consultations that storytelling was one of the most effective methods of delivering complex legal information to younger people, particularly those who may still be learning English. We then conducted further research on storytelling methods and decided to use applied theatre, specifically Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed, because the research demonstrated it was a globally effective way of delivering education on human rights issues. Boal was a Brazilian theatre practitioner and an activist whose methodology encouraged active audience participation. The aim of his method was not only to give a deeper understanding of the issues presented, but also to encourage the audience through participation to act as a catalyst for social change. Forum theatre, or theatre of the oppressed, consists of improvised scenes and a proposal to a group of spectators to improvise, changing the narrative of the protagonist. Boal believes that if people can role play, creating change, they can then change the reality. As well as identifying the best method to deliver legal information, we also wanted to deliver the most appropriate information. A thorough legal research was conducted to have a better understanding of adolescents using violence at home, as well as understanding forced marriage in Australia. We then decided that we want to deliver the legal information through telling the story of a family of 4 experiencing different forms of family violence, including forced marriage. And that through the story, we would illustrate the impact of violence in each of these family members. We created a basic script, and then we felt the need to collaborate with a theatre group or a creative team to help us further develop the script and also deliver the performances. We were fortunate enough to partner with a creative team led by a theatrical consultant who is also a dramaturg, and the team consisted of actors as well as a trauma-informed consultant and a director. And we conducted a series of workshops with the creative team to further develop the script and ensure that the actors were fully familiar with the legal issues and other sensitivities associated with the material on family violence and forced marriage. As we started the creative workshops, we decided that the performance should be delivered in a classroom setting with a smaller audience in a circle of safety, which included the students, the performance, as well as the PCLC staff. And that was meant to create a feeling of familiarity and safety that is required for an open discussion. We also included trigger warnings at the beginning of each performance, given the nature of the material. In addition to the actors performing the story of the family, I became an accidental actor. So I play the role of a lawyer as a device to convey the legal information, and Kirsten facilitates the session. The script describes the circle of violence, where the father is the main perpetrator of family violence, while the mother and the son are both perpetrators and victim survivor. The daughter is always at the receiving end of all the violence. The story illustrates how some characters choose to take responsibility for their actions and challenge the dynamics of violence, while others don't. In the end, there is a monologue by the father who chooses not to change his behavior, even though he was a victim of family violence himself, and another by the son who chooses to break the cycle and not be like his father. The audience is encouraged to participate throughout the session in identifying the different forms of family violence, challenging the behaviors of the characters, and identifying how the characters can change the narrative by getting help. The performance involves themes of self-reflection on agency, choice, change, and growth. And throughout the sessions, the students are invited to reflect on how the antagonist's behavior made the protagonist feel. An invitation is also made to the students to reflect on how culture and society dictate how people behave, and to challenge the social and cultural assumptions that underlie family violence. So the performances start with an introduction by the facilitator. And very often at that stage, the students are chattering and laughing, as you might expect from an audience of that age. But once the performance starts and the character of the father starts shouting at the mother, all of the chatter stops. And the audience is drawn into the story in a very compelling and quite an intense way. So right from the first scene, they're hooked and they continue to engage with the performance throughout. So that was what we really hoped that the theatre, use of theatre would achieve, and the using professional actors also proved to be really successful in terms of the ability to get the attention of the audience right from the beginning and to sustain it right throughout in a way that other sort of CLE talks that we give can't quite do in the same way. In some of the performances, the students had conversations with the performers, and particularly about things like what amounted to abuse and gender stereotypes. And that conversation with the performers turned what would otherwise might be kind of abstract concepts of family violence into believable experiences that affect real people. Another key feature of what happened in the performances was that there was often very lively and robust debate between the students and groups of students themselves, where some students would challenge other students about definitions of what amounts to abuse and gender stereotypes.
So, for example, in the scenes involving economic abuse, some of the students would defend the behaviour of the abusive father. And they would say things like, well, the father works and he makes all the money, so it's his, so he should be allowed to do what he wants with it. The mother doesn't work, so it's only normal that the father would control the money, and that's not abuse. Or there's one scene where the brother tries to force his sister to take down an Instagram post because she's wearing clothing that he thinks is inappropriate and that has embarrassed him with his friends. And he says if she doesn't take it down, that he will force her to do it. And so some of the students will say, well, you know, that's not really abusive. He's not controlling her. He's just trying to protect her. So very often when some of the students would challenge those defences of the abusive character's behaviour, we would see the students who were defending the behaviours retreat and step back from those positions, which we thought was because of the power of the performance.
So overall, the performance seemed to have really connected with the audiences who were able to express their opinions openly and have also been really interesting for us to run. The levels of engagement by the students with the material has been incredible, and the retention of the information also seems to be really high. Teachers and school wellbeing staff, in particular, commented on this, with some saying that the students who they feared would disrupt the session, particularly the boys, were in fact the most active participants, with the numbers saying they had never seen some of their students engage so actively. We also received very positive feedback from teachers about the fact that the cultural aspect of family violence were touched on, and that some of the students who experienced family violence came to us after the sessions for more information. In the formal evaluations, on average, the students rated the sessions as either 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. After the VLF funding ended earlier this year, we continued to receive requests for more performances. So PCLC has decided to continue its investment in the project. We are now entering our second year of delivering the performances. Fortunately, our partners Uniting is also committed, and among other things is continuing to provide the budget for the actors. So far, we've delivered 20 performances in 4 different schools for close to 500 students.
But there have been some challenges in delivering the project because it deals with very sensitive subject matter, it's been difficult sometimes to get things exactly right. So, for example, in some of the performances, we noticed that the female students were finding it, weren't very vocal and were struggling to participate. And that happened particularly in the sessions where some of the male students were dominating the discussions and very enthusiastically defending the abusive behaviours of the 2 male characters. So we decided, in conjunction with the schools in those schools, to run separate sessions for the male and female students. We would have preferred to keep the students, the sessions co-ed, but when we ran them separately, it did result in the female students being far more vocal and far more participatory. But in the end, even in some of those tougher sessions, the students who were defending the abusive characters were always very actively engaged and participatory. And so what it actually did was it provided an opportunity for the other students to see among their peers the negative gender stereotypes, negative ideas about gender equality that the performance was trying to illustrate. And they were then able to see how those behaviours can be challenged and how, when challenged, those students would often back down from those positions. But that probably the greatest challenge of the project was achieving our aim of shifting those deeply ingrained attitudes, which obviously do take time to shift. But the project has planted a seed to start a hugely important conversation amongst the students who've seen it about those negative behaviours that and gender stereotypes that underlie and lead to family violence. And in fact, the head of the wellbeing team at one school just told us recently that the students that saw the performance are still talking about it months later and the issues raised. So that's a really great sign. We were aware that we were very lucky to have a budget for professional actors. But even if you don't have professional actors, we think that it is the performance is something that could be done with volunteers or other staff in the organisation, and we can make the script available to anybody who's interested. So I think that's it, and we'll be very happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Angie and Kirsten, for that absolutely brilliant and insightful view of the project that you've done. It's such a powerful vehicle for social change. You know, theatre and theatre of the oppressed specifically as an art form is really a powerful way to just engage and I suppose allow those young people to really feel and I guess interrogate how they feel when they see that performance and then start to reflect on how that feels relevant to their life. And the fact that you're talking about them asking questions and kind of challenging each other feels like that just is testament to how powerful that experience was for them. So congratulations on your fabulous project. I'm also delighted to hear that you've been able to continue the project beyond the initial VLF funding, which is very exciting to hear. We have had a couple of questions. Oh, God, the Q&A box is exploding. We've got quite a few questions coming in. I know that we've got, for time purposes, I'll just have a quick filter through. I'm just the one that's come through at the top. Obviously, someone's saying, "Thank you. This is a very powerful way to educate. Bravo." So there we go. We'll send that as a quote for you so that you can put that in future funding applications. And then, so there's a question here around, were there lead-up discussions and follow-up lessons to explore these topics and share information before and after the performances within the school? So I suppose that's around wraparound activity and I guess aftercare and through care for the performers and also for the students. And I guess there's another question here which links to that one around the defence of abusive behaviours by some students addressed within the session. How was that addressed by the facilitators?
Okay, so with the care before and after the sessions, so we work very closely with the wellbeing teams at the schools, and we usually go into programs that they already running to school students. So we come in as part of a bigger picture, but we also have the wellbeing staff present during the sessions to have any discussions afterwards with the students, or they basically say, "Hi, we're here if you need to talk to us." In some sessions, we've had students come and speak to us as well, and then we would provide information and support. So we work very closely with the schools to deliver these sessions as part of programs that they already run, and then the well-being, look after their students after the sessions. In terms of defenses by the students in the sessions, we made sure that we challenge these ideas. So, for example, with some of the examples that Kristen mentioned, things like, "Oh, well, but the money is the father's money," would say things like, "But what about the work that the mother does at home? If she doesn't do it, then someone else will have to do all of that and get paid. So that's actually paid work that you pay people to do, and it's not just his money, it's the family's money." Also, in terms of protection and an argument around, "Oh, well, that's an argument between a brother and a sister, that's not abuse," we reflect on how protection is meant to make the other, like the daughter feel, or the sister feel. It meant to make her feel safe rather than scared or threatened. So the conversation as well showed how the students were challenging each other's on this, but also the understanding of the concepts that presented. Kristen, do you want to add anything?
The only thing that I would add is that it really was difficult sometimes to challenge those behaviours. There's no question. And you know, all of the sessions would vary, but we had some that were really tough, where we had particularly the male students who were being, you know, they saw it as being kind of, I think, a bit of fun. And it was, but it was just a question of coming back with logical answers. Sometimes we even had to freeze out some of the students who kept doing that. Sometimes the wellbeing team would actually take some of the more disruptive students out. That had to happen. But it's also true to say that then they would come back in and they would keep engaging. So that was the important part, to keep them going with the, you know, going with the conversation.
Yeah, because I feel sometimes those are the students that need to be involved in these conversations the most, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And that was the feedback that we got from some of the teachers. Some of these students were students that had already disengaged from school and then had come back. And they said that normally they don't engage, they don't participate at all. So we took that as being the fact they're engaging and they want to talk about it is a great thing. And that they get challenged by the other students.
So given that that family violence, as you've said, is a bit of a prevalent issue in the community, there's a question in the Q&A box around whether there was any pushback from the parents or the families when they kind of heard about this project that was happening, or whether that was something that was handled by the school before it got to you.
That's a great question. We were actually worried about that ourselves, wondering how it was going to happen, but we let the schools handle all of that. So the schools asked us, we produced a blurb about what the performance was about. They publicised it in their own way, and we haven't heard of any pushback.
Fantastic. And just in terms of the art form, I suppose there's a question here around, because you've obviously talked about the importance human rights, the kind of human rights approach that Boal's work can take. Someone here is asking if when you were doing your kind of preparatory questions and exploring all of these different types of art forms that you might be able to use, were there any other theatrical forms that came up in your research that might address the problem of silencing female student voices? Because it does seem important to have all the students gathered in the same room, as you've said, and if not, perhaps a prompt to consider what forms could enable better participation. Did you come across anything else?
Well, not that I can think of, because the problem with the female students' participation is twofold. So you've got some of the cultural aspect of the students, of the females not wanting to engage with this topic in particular because they feel like, oh, why are you talking to this about, to this topic? Why are you talking about this topic to us? Or, if I say something, someone might think I'm experiencing that. So there's that bit, but there's also the fact that the students don't want to say anything that later on they might be teased about in the school, which is something that some of the female students have brought up. They're like, oh well, I didn't really want to say something that would especially the boys would bring up later on. So the solution for that seems to us to be sometimes, not in all schools, have separate sessions for girls and boys. And it didn't seem to us that this would make a difference in terms of the learning. On the contrary, when we did have separate sessions, we found that the girls were really engaged, spoke openly, and we didn't feel like they missed out on anything if they weren't with the boys in the same room. But in fact, most of the sessions that we've run were mixed. And
we wanted to have mixed sessions, as I said. And if I can quickly say, if anybody knows of a human rights approach that would deal with that, we would love to hear about it. And also quickly to say, so we don't engage in gender stereotypes. It was sometimes the female students who were defending some of the abusive behavior as well, because they didn't sort of understand the dynamics. So it wasn't always just the male students who were defending.
Fantastic. All right, I'm just going to ask one more quick question from the box, because I'm aware we're at the end of time, about, was there much focus on the legal aspect, like legal definition of family violence and legal avenues it takes, or is it mostly around changing attitudes?
No, we're a community legal centre,
Exactly.
so there was a lot of legal stuff. And in fact, the comment we got from the students was, less talk about the law and more acting.
Of course.
But also we covered things like the definition of family violence, what are the different forms of family violence, what's an coercive control, economic abuse, even using technology in family violence, as well as what's an intervention order, the concept of confidentiality. And even we touched on criminal side of things, like, okay, what if you get criminally charged in terms of the, the brother, because he's young, that would affect his study prospect, travel prospects, or work prospects and things like that. So we covered different legal topics in that short time frame. Yeah.
My gosh, what a brilliant project. Well, I just, on behalf of Victoria Legal Foundation and everybody in the room, because everyone's desperate to connect with you, so we'll probably send some emails after this. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Angie and Kirsten, for your generosity in sharing your learning and your process, and how you've worked to create such a powerful and brilliant project to change the face of legal education in Victoria. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for today, and thank you everybody for joining us from wherever you are. We will be sending out a follow-up email after today with the link to this recording, so that you can come back and watch it again and again and again, and imagine Angie and Kirsten as Omar and Danny in their room there. And also we'll send out links to the script and copies of any additional resources, so there'll be some information about BOAL in there. And please do reach out if you have any further questions or you'd like to get in touch. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.